All right, now that I have my board ready to go, my still life is set up, everything is secured down so that it doesn't move on me. I also have some drawing paper. Because this is a pre-assessment, we are just measuring your starting point of your drawing abilities. So we do not need anything fancier than just some drawing paper. One thing that I am going to do, just to make my life a little bit easier, is I am going to just figure out the same size of the board, because that's the size that I want my drawing to be. So I just kind of laid it over top and just marked that line. I can mark the left side as well, but it came right up to my perforated edge, so I wasn't worried about it. Our goal when we're doing this drawing is to keep everything the same size or the same scale. We do not want to draw objects smaller than life or larger than life. I want them to be the same size. So what I'm going to do is something called working general to specific. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working in here, and I'm going to draw on my paper, and I would draw very lightly. I'm drawing a little bit darker than I would in real life, just because I need you on the screen to be able to see what I'm doing. And I'm just going to very quickly map in the placement of each of my objects. I'm not going to go into super detail because right now I'm just worried about the size and the position. So I might go through and say my paintbrush is about right here. I'm not going to go through and say, oh, it's got this detail and here it creates this edge, because the truth is I may have to move this later. It may not be in the right spot, and that'll be more obvious as I draw the other objects in. So I may jump over here to my Joy-Con. My Joy-Con probably comes a little bit past halfway. I'm going to try and create the general shape of it without going into too much detail. I know that I'm going to end up fixing, correcting, erasing some of the things that I draw, but if I can create the placement and size of each object to begin with, I'm setting myself up for a much more successful drawing in the end. From here, I'm going to kind of just map in the cord or the strap. Now, remember when I said I'm putting in the general shape first? One thing that I noticed immediately is this is the wrong spot. So look at this gap size here versus look at this gap size here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and shove that over. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and fast forward and time lapse this video just so that you can kind of see how I would go about this in real life. All right, so at this point, what you notice is that I have drawn this in and I have put in a basic placement. Now, a couple of things. I did put a little bit more detail on the Pez face just because I really was feeling unsure about the size of the face. So I knew putting in some of those big basic shapes on his face would help me know if I got it right or not. And even then, I feel like this needs to drop down, and now I've got a little bit more room for his little chubby face, and already that looks a little bit more like him. So I made corrections as I went, but I still didn't go into a lot of detail on these. Notice that when I put this one in, the entire change of the post-it, I had to erase the whole post-it and start on the post-it again. So that is a prime example as to why we figure out the placement of every object before we do anything else. Now from here, I'm going to start putting in details. So I'm actually going to go through and I'm going to make it look like what I actually want it to look like. I'm going to start adding things in like the stripes on Pikachu, the little detail on the Pez there. I'm going to start adding in maybe the thickness of the letters, how the paintbrush gets thinner, changes here in these areas, how it tapers out, tapers in. I'm going to add that tape. I'm going to add the details of this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to focus on an object at a time. Now that I'm pretty happy with the placement of all of my objects, even though I might tweak them just a little bit. For example, I think that the shape of this, now that I'm looking at it, changes. One good thing to do is always step away from your art when you've got it. Step back, look at it from a slightly larger distance, and just it allows you to be a little more objective. All right, so at this point, you're going to see me start getting in those details and paying attention to a little bit more of those. Now that I'm finished with my drawing, here's a few things that I want to point out that I hope you noticed while I was drawing. When I went through the first time, I mapped everything out, general placements. Then I started going into each item and adding the specific details to those items. There were a lot of times I changed things I didn't notice. You probably saw me draw this foot to the Pez multiple times. I struggled with it because the perspective was a little bit awkward to do. And also in the photo here, what you're seeing isn't quite the exact placement of what I'm seeing. What I'm seeing is just a slightly more like this than what you saw. So for example, I see a little bit more of this foot. I also see this part of the black part of the like bumper of the actual Joy-Con. So my perspective is just slightly different because your camera is straight down, whereas my angle where my head is positioned is not quite the same. So it is going to be a slightly different than in this image. I also want you to notice that I had to struggle and clean up things. So anytime I finished and drew something, I went back, I tried to clean it up and make it look a little bit nicer. For example, right here, that line looks really, really sketchy. So I might erase it, go back, give it a sharper, cleaner edge, and make it look really nice afterwards. Another thing that you'll notice is I put in those shadows because the lighting that I have cast shadows onto the surface. I tried to draw those a little lighter, maybe a little bit sketchier to give the illusion that those are shadows. So this is a shadow, here's a shadow, 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 shadow. So I'm definitely going to have a lot of those. I even have a little bit of a shadow I probably should have added here. So now I'm going to kind of maybe step back a little bit, challenge myself, say, did I miss anything? Look at each item individually, see if there's anything that needs tweaked or fixed. I want this to look like it's the best of my ability because I want to do the best that I can do. I want to represent my true ability level, and I want to be able to express what these items are to my viewer. If we look at my actual time while creating this, I drew solidly for about an hour. When we time lapse this video, you will see how that obviously doesn't look like an hour to you. But what I want you to pay attention to is I've been to college. I've done art classes in college. I got my degree in art education. So this is probably going to be very, very different for me than for you as my student. What I expect you to do is to probably spend about 2 hours on this. That means each one of your objects, if you really think about it, say that you're spending 20 minutes on an object, that's 20, 40, 60, an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and 40 minutes for each of your objects combined. And so if you spend about 20 minutes per object, I think that'd be a great place. Now, some objects will take you more time than others, but I think that your drawing time should be anywhere between an hour and 2 hours, depending on the complexity of the images that you drew and the amount of time that you're distracted will pay into that. When I did this, I did not have anything going and distracting me. I didn't have any videos. I didn't have any music. But there's nothing wrong with having music. Just make sure that it really, you aren't sitting there managing the music and skipping, pick a song. You want to just focus in on the drawing. So your drawing time should be between an hour and 2 hours, depending on your ability level and depending on the complexity of your objects that you picked out. So this would be the end of the pre-assessment. I'm now going to take a photo of this and upload it to our turn-in spot. All right, there you go.